A recurring theme throughout military history has led to the downfall of three global powers within the last 6 centuries. Alarmingly, in the year 2025, the United States appears to be progressing through this identical pattern, facing setbacks stage by stage, much like following a script that previously culminated in disaster. In 378 AD, the Roman Empire possessed the world's most formidable military. Its legions were considered unconquerable, having achieved dominance across 3 continents, with no opposing force capable of challenging them. Then, at the pivotal Battle of Adrianople, Rome endured a single, devastating defeat. Within 32 years, Rome itself was sacked, and the Western Roman Empire crumbled 70 years later. The once invincible army had devolved into a subject of ridicule. In 1940, France commanded Europe's largest military force, protected by the seemingly impregnable Maginot Line. French military leaders lauded their armed forces as the world's finest. However, when Germany launched its invasion, the entire myth was shattered in a mere 6 weeks. The French army, universally believed to be invincible, suffered a complete and utter defeat, transforming France into a puppet state overnight. In 1979, the Soviet Union stood as a global superpower, boasting nuclear weaponry, the planet's largest army, and decades of military supremacy. Their invasion of Afghanistan, anticipated to be a swift operation lasting mere months, instead resulted in a decade-long entanglement, concluding with a humiliating retreat. Less than 2 years after their withdrawal, the Soviet Union ceased to exist, its imperial collapse directly triggered by its military failure. 3 times, 3 military behemoths, 3 total implosions, all unfolding in the exact same sequence. What should truly instill fear is that the United States military, having dominated global conflicts for 80 years, is now exhibiting every single precursor to the collapses witnessed before. We are not at the outset of this pattern. Rather, we are at stage 4 of 6. This is the identical stage at which Rome's aura of invincibility fractured, the same point where France's military prowess was revealed as illusory, and the very stage where the Soviet Union's military reputation was extinguished in the unforgiving terrain of Afghanistan. This is the narrative of how empires lose their martial edge, how a powerful reputation can linger long after actual capability has eroded, and why every warning sign points to America's impending turn. Before we delve into the intricacies of this pattern, it is crucial to comprehend what military decline truly entails, not in abstract theory, but in practical manifestation. What does it signify when a superpower's military falters and ultimately collapses? Military decline does not commence with defeat on the battlefield. It originates with an internal erosion. Budgetary reductions are disguised as efficiency drives. Recruitment challenges are attributed to cultural shifts. Aging equipment persists while procurement languishes, and training quality deteriorates as standards are lowered. Initially, this decline is imperceptible. The military maintains its global network of bases, possesses advanced weaponry, and its leaders deliver confident pronouncements. Allies continue to place faith in their security assurances. Yet beneath this veneer, the foundational structure is decaying. Subsequently, the moment of truth arrives. A conflict emerges, starkly exposing the chasm between established reputation and actual reality. A defeat that should have been inconceivable occurs, against an adversary that should never have prevailed. At this juncture, the stark truth becomes undeniable. This is when the pattern accelerates. Allies begin to hedge their bets, and adversaries probe at vulnerabilities. Every prior commitment transforms into a question mark. The military that once guaranteed security devolves into a liability. The empire, constructed on projecting power abroad, discovers its inability to do so any longer. This is not conjecture. This is the historical trajectory of Rome, France, and the Soviet Union. And it transpired because they repeated the very same errors we are presently making. They presumed their military might was an immutable constant. They permitted a decline in readiness while prioritizing appearances. They conflated reputation with substantive capability, and they only grasped the reality when rectifying it had become an impossibility. Let us examine how this unfolded precisely 3 times, in an identical fashion. We shall begin with the original blueprint, Rome, from 350 to 410 AD. For 4 centuries, the Roman legions were an unstoppable force, conquering Gaul, Britain, Egypt, Judea, Greece, Spain, and North Africa. Any kingdom that dared to challenge Rome was annihilated. The legion represented the zenith of military advancement in the ancient world, comprised of professional soldiers, standardized equipment, unyielding discipline, and brilliant tactical execution. By 350 AD, Rome exerted control over territories spanning from Scotland to Syria, encompassing 3 continents and 60 million inhabitants. The military was the bedrock of this imperial power. However, beneath the formidable reputation, the legions were in a state of decline. The military had reached its apex in 117 AD under Emperor Trajan. By 350 AD, it had been on a downward trajectory for 2 centuries, a fact few were willing to acknowledge. Here's what was occurring internally. Rome struggled to recruit sufficient citizens. The traditional system, wherein Roman citizens enlisted in the legions, had eroded. The extension of citizenship to all inhabitants of the empire, while seemingly magnanimous, proved detrimental to military culture. Why would a farmer in Egypt dedicate his life to fighting for Rome? Consequently, Rome adopted the strategy common to all declining military powers. They lowered their recruitment standards and enlisted barbarians, Germanic tribes, Goths, Huns, essentially anyone willing to fight. By 350 AD, over half of Rome's legions comprised foreign mercenaries who harbored no genuine allegiance to Rome. The quality of equipment deteriorated. The standardized gear that had once ensured the legion's effectiveness was deemed too costly. Armor became lighter, training periods were shortened, and discipline waned. Nevertheless, Rome's reputation remained intact. When Roman armies marched, adversaries still retreated. The enduring legacy of Roman invincibility served in place of actual military capability. Then, on the 9th of August, 378 AD, came the Battle of Adrianople. Emperor Valens of the Eastern Roman Empire confronted a Gothic army in Thrace, in what is modern-day Turkey. By 410 AD, a mere 32 years later, Alaric the Visigoth sacked Rome. The city, which had not been conquered for 800 years, fell within 3 days. The Western Roman Empire lingered for another 66 years, but its military was irrevocably broken. By 476 AD, Rome could no longer field an effective army, and Germanic warlords held sway over vast territories. The empire, built upon military dominance, collapsed because its military had perished. The pattern: peak strength followed by internal decline, concealed by reputation. A singular major defeat exposes the stark reality, leading to a cascade of further defeats, and ultimately the empire's demise. Now, let us fast forward 1,360 years to France in 1940. Following the First World War, France possessed Europe's most formidable military. They had engaged Germany in a protracted 4-year conflict and emerged victorious. French generals were lauded, and the French army was massive, exceptionally equipped, and battle-hardened. By 1939, France had constructed the Maginot Line, a defensive fortification system along the German border, presumed to be impenetrable. French military strategy was rooted in defense, attrition, and the unwavering conviction that Germany could not breach these defenses. The rest of Europe viewed France with awe, perceiving its military as invincible. Britain depended on French military strength. Poland relied on French assurances, and Belgium placed its trust in French guarantees. However, beneath this formidable facade, the reputation remained untarnished while the underlying capability was steadily eroding. The fundamental issue was that French military doctrine had failed to evolve. They were still preparing to fight another war akin to the First World War, characterized by static defenses, slow mobilization, and attrition warfare. They neglected the transformative lessons of mechanized combat. While possessing tanks, they deployed them in roles supporting infantry, rather than concentrating them for offensive impact. Conversely, German military theory had advanced significantly, embracing the concept of blitzkrieg, rapid, concentrated assaults. Their tanks were organized into specialized divisions, supported by air power, designed to penetrate weak points and encircle enemy forces. Speed, surprise, and coordinated action were paramount. France possessed more tanks than Germany, a larger standing army, and more artillery, yet they were hampered by outdated tactics, a sluggish command structure, and rigid strategic thinking. On May 10, 1940, Germany initiated its invasion. The world anticipated another protracted, grueling conflict, a repeat of the 4 years of trench warfare experienced in the First World War. However, the reality unfolded in just 6 weeks. Germany bypassed the Maginot Line, advancing through the Ardennes forest. French command had erroneously believed that tanks could not traverse this terrain. Their miscalculation proved fatal. German panzers broke through at Sedan, and French defenses rapidly crumbled. Within days, Germany had effectively severed French and British armies in two. The British commenced their evacuation from Dunkirk, while the French government fled Paris. On June 22nd, France surrendered. 6 weeks. The most powerful army in Europe was decimated in 6 weeks. This was not merely a single defeat. It was a complete collapse. The disparity between France's reputation and its actual military readiness was so profound that its exposure led to the immediate disintegration of its entire armed forces. Crucially, for understanding this pattern, it was not that Germany possessed superior equipment. France fielded comparable tanks and a larger number of troops. The critical factor was that French military doctrine, training, and command structure had decayed while its reputation remained artificially inflated. They had coasted on the glory of the First World War for 2 decades, a victim of their own mythology. When confronted by an adversary that had genuinely innovated, they discovered their military was obsolete. France never recovered its status as a dominant military power. Liberated by American and British forces in 1944, its military prestige, however, was irrevocably shattered. To this day, France occupies a position as a second-tier power, a stark contrast to its former superpower status. The pattern repeats. Reputation sustained long after capability diminished. A single critical test exposed the truth, resulting in immediate collapse. Let us consider one more instance, the Soviet Union, from 1979 to 1989. In 1979, the Soviet military was immense, comprising 5 million soldiers, possessing nuclear weapons, the world's largest tank force, and demonstrating decades of military dominance throughout Eastern Europe. When the Soviets invaded Czechoslovakia in 1968, resistance lasted a mere day, reinforcing the perception of Soviet invincibility. America was still grappling with the aftermath of Vietnam, and China was militarily weak. The Soviet military commanded widespread fear. Then, in December of 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. Their objective was straightforward: install a compliant communist government, stabilize the country, and withdraw within months. This should have been a facile operation. Afghanistan was impoverished, fragmented, and technologically rudimentary. The Soviets possessed tanks, helicopters, and advanced weaponry, while Afghan resistance fighters were armed with antiquated rifles. 10 years later, the Soviets were forced into a humiliating retreat, having suffered 15,000 soldier fatalities and hundreds of thousands of Afghan casualties. The war cost billions and critically undermined the Soviet military. Herein lay the problem. The Soviet military, while appearing formidable on paper, was internally hollow. Conscription meant soldiers lacked motivation, leading to abysmal morale, widespread drug abuse, and frequent desertions. Officers were corrupt, and equipment maintenance was severely neglected. The Soviets attempted to combat a guerrilla insurgency using conventional military tactics. They resorted to bombing villages and occupying cities, but they were incapable of controlling the vast rural areas. The Mujahideen, supported by the United States and Pakistan, adapted their strategies, ambushing convoys, shooting down helicopters, and rendering the occupation untenable. The Soviet military proved incapable of achieving victory. As the years dragged on, the conflict laid bare the systemic flaws of the Soviet system: corruption, incompetence, and brutality that engendered further animosity, coupled with supply chain failures and leadership deficiencies. On February 15, 1989, the final Soviet soldier crossed the bridge out of Afghanistan. This defeat exposed the Soviet military's power as a mere illusion. An invincible army had been vanquished by farmers armed with rifles, and once this reputation disintegrated, the empire followed suit. Eastern Europe observed this unfolding situation. If the Soviets could not defeat Afghanistan, how could they possibly maintain their grip on Eastern Europe? Within 2 years, the Berlin Wall crumbled, the Warsaw Pact dissolved, and by December of 1991, the Soviet Union had ceased to exist. The pattern: military reputation remained intact despite internal decay. Afghanistan served as the catalyst that exposed the truth, followed by a cascade of subsequent defeats culminating in imperial collapse. 3 times: Rome, France, the Soviet Union. 3 military superpowers, 3 collapses, all adhering to the identical sequence, and now it is transpacing once more. Let us meticulously deconstruct this pattern, for once you recognize the 6 distinct stages, you will precisely understand America's current position. Stage 1. Peak military power. The military is genuinely dominant, characterized by advanced technology, superior training, robust morale, effortless recruitment, state-of-the-art equipment, and enemies who actively avoid confrontation, while allies place unwavering trust in security guarantees. This represents authentic strength, not mere perception. Examples include Rome around 100 AD, France in 1918, the USSR in 1945, and the USA in 1991. Stage 2. Internal decline commences. This decline begins subtly. Budgetary constraints necessitate compromises. Recruitment standards are lowered to fill troop quotas. Equipment ages, but replacements are postponed. Training quality degrades and bureaucratic inefficiencies proliferate. Innovation falters. However, these issues remain concealed from public view. Generals insist that all is well. This stage is exemplified by Rome around 250 AD, France in 1925, the USSR in 1970, and the USA around 2005. Stage 3. Reputation sustains despite underlying weakness. The military's reputation remains intact, yet its actual capabilities have significantly diminished. Adversaries still harbor respect for its name, and allies continue to rely on its security commitments. Internally, leadership is aware of significant challenges, with readiness becoming questionable and morale flagging. The disparity between reputation and reality widens. This phase corresponds to Rome around 370 AD, France in 1938, the USSR in 1978, and the USA in 2020. Stage 4. The initial major defeat reveals the truth. The military encounters a challenge it should easily surmount, but it falters. This defeat might manifest as a single battle or a failed campaign, but its impact is to expose the reality. The supposedly invincible military is not so. The gap is revealed. Allies begin to question their security guarantees, and adversaries perceive weakness. The reputation that had been sustained for decades evaporates instantaneously. This stage is marked by Rome's defeat at Adrianople in 378 AD, France's collapse during the German invasion in 1940, the Soviet Union's withdrawal from Afghanistan in 1989, and the United States' withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021. Stage 5. A cascade of defeats ensues. Allies begin to defect. Following the initial significant setback, further defeats rapidly accumulate, each more severe than the last. Allies adopt a more cautious stance, with some shifting allegiances. Adversaries exploit perceived vulnerabilities across various fronts. The once feared military becomes a subject of doubt. Can it effectively defend any territory? Security guarantees lose their credibility, and the empire's sphere of influence contracts dramatically. This occurred with Rome between 400 and 450 AD, marked by multiple sackings. France experienced immediate post-1940 territorial losses. The USSR saw Eastern European nations assert their independence between 1989 and 1991. Stage 6. The empire's power projection capability is extinguished. The military is too enfeebled to safeguard the empire's interests. Overseas bases are shuttered, allies depart, and adversaries act with impunity. The empire is compelled to retreat to its core territories. The era of global dominance is irrevocably over. The superpower is reduced to a regional power, or faces complete disintegration. This was the fate of Rome by 476 AD, France permanently after the Second World War, and the USSR in 1991. The United States faces this potential future. 6 stages. 3 empires followed this trajectory completely. Rome took 100 years to progress from stage 4 to stage 6. France's transition took a mere year. The USSR's collapse occurred within 2 years. Each subsequent implosion unfolded with greater rapidity. The pattern is evident, and the sequence is identical. Currently, the United States finds itself at stage 4. Allow me to elaborate on why the evidence is overwhelmingly compelling. Stage 1 represented 1991, the Gulf War. The United States military utterly decimated the 4th largest army on Earth in just 100 hours, employing precision weaponry and overwhelming air superiority, achieving total dominance. This marked the zenith of American military might. The world had never witnessed such a display of power. The United States possessed the capability to wage and win 2 major conflicts concurrently. This was the prevailing doctrine and reality. Stage 2 commenced subtly around 2005. The protracted conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan placed immense strain on the military. Equipment was wearing out at a rate exceeding its replacement capacity. While the defense budget was substantial, the majority was allocated to operational expenses rather than modernization. Production of the F-22 fighter jet was curtailed prematurely. The Navy's fleet, once comprising 600 vessels, dwindled to fewer than 300. The Army underwent downsizing, yet assurances were made that this was a necessary efficiency measure, bolstered by technological advancements and a focus on quality over quantity. By 2020, we had reached Stage 3. The American military's reputation remained remarkably intact. China did not directly challenge our supremacy, and Russia proceeded with caution. Our allies continued to place absolute trust in our security commitments. NATO member states relied on American protection, as did Japan and South Korea. Taiwan was confident in our intervention should China launch an invasion. However, internally, a multitude of problems were accumulating. Recruitment was becoming increasingly difficult, necessitating a lowering of standards. Equipment was aging. B-52 bombers, which entered service in 1955, were still operational 70 years later, aircraft older than the grandparents of many of their pilots. The Navy's fleet had shrunk to 290 ships, the smallest number since the period preceding the First World War, while China's naval strength had expanded to over 350 vessels. The Army's active duty personnel numbers were decreasing, yet the military's reputation remained unassailed. The prevailing belief was that American military power was unparalleled. Then in August of 2021 came the withdrawal from Afghanistan after 20 years and an expenditure of $2 trillion. The most advanced military force on the planet faced the Taliban, an organization lacking an air force, a navy, satellite capabilities, or advanced weaponry. We had dedicated 2 decades to training and equipping the Afghan military, assuring the world of their capacity to maintain control of the country. The Taliban seized power in just 11 days. 11 days. The Afghan military, which we had spent 20 years building, disintegrated almost instantaneously. The Taliban entered Kabul on August 15th. The scenes at the airport were chaotic, with Afghans falling from departing aircraft as the American military executed a panicked evacuation. 13 U.S. service members tragically lost their lives in a suicide bombing. The final C-17 transport aircraft departed on August 30th, leaving behind billions of dollars worth of military equipment. Helicopters, armored vehicles, weaponry, and night vision goggles. In essence, we inadvertently equipped the Taliban with more sophisticated material than many of our own allies possess. This marks Stage 4, America's equivalent of Adrianople, the moment when the stark contrast between our reputation and our actual capabilities was irrevocably exposed. We were defeated by the Taliban. After 20 years, we lost. The most powerful military in history was overcome by an insurgency armed with rifles and improvised explosive devices. And just as Rome experienced after Adrianople, France after 1940, and the Soviet Union after Afghanistan, the global community took notice. China observed, Russia observed, Iran observed, and they all perceived weakness. However, the signs of decline extend beyond Afghanistan. The indicators are ubiquitous. Let us examine them, for every single warning sign that preceded the military collapses of Rome, France, and the Soviet Union is now flashing a critical red alert for America. Recruitment crisis. The U.S. military is failing to meet its recruitment targets by a staggering 25%. Equipment aging. B-52 bombers date back to the 1950s, and Minuteman 30 intercontinental ballistic missiles were introduced in 1970. The average age of Air Force aircraft stands at 28 years, the oldest in its history. Naval vessels are being kept in service for decades beyond their intended operational lifespans. The USS Nimitz aircraft carrier, 48 years old, remains actively deployed. We are not replacing equipment at a sufficient rate due to systemic procurement failures, leading to cost overruns and schedule delays. The F-35 program is 15 years behind schedule and has exceeded its budget by $183 billion, yet it continues to face unresolved issues. Meanwhile, China is constructing naval vessels at an unprecedented pace, launching 3 aircraft carriers during the time it took us to build just 1. Force structure contraction. The Navy operates with 290 ships, while China possesses over 350. Our fleet of attack submarines has grown from 41 to 49, while China commands 66 and continues to expand its submarine force. The Army's active duty personnel numbers have fallen from 566,000 in 2010 to 452,000 today. The Air Force operates fewer aircraft than at any point since its inception. We are smaller, older and more stretched than ever before. Readiness issues. Only 50% of Air Force fighter jets are mission capable at any given time, meaning half the fleet is grounded due to maintenance or repairs. Naval ships are spending less time at sea due to severe maintenance backlogs. Training hours are being reduced to conserve funds. The military's readiness to engage in combat is at its lowest point since the 1970s. Budgetary concerns disguised by inflated figures. The defense budget exceeds $800 billion, a colossal sum. However, the majority of this funding is directed towards personnel costs, benefits, and operational expenses. A mere 20% is allocated to procurement and modernization. We are expending more resources while achieving diminished returns. Consequently, due to our extensive global commitments, we are unable to concentrate our forces effectively, rendering us strong nowhere because we are overextended everywhere. Technological edge erosion. China has developed hypersonic missiles capable of sinking aircraft carriers, against which we currently possess no effective defense. Russia employs sophisticated jamming technology that disrupts our communications and GPS systems. Our drones are being shot down in Ukraine. The technological advantage that has defined American military supremacy for 30 years is rapidly diminishing. Other nations are now closing the gap, and in certain sectors they have actually surpassed us. Internal issues like declining morale and political friction are evident. Military suicide rates are at unprecedented levels, and retaining personnel is a significant challenge. The most accomplished officers and non-commissioned officers are seeking opportunities in the private sector. Confidence in leadership is eroding. Internal ideological disputes are surfacing within the armed forces, and political polarization is negatively impacting unit cohesion. This represents the kind of internal decay that led to the downfall of Roman legions and Soviet divisions. Perhaps the most crucial indicator of this trend is that our reputation is still somewhat propping us up. Our allies still place credence in American commitments, but they are beginning to diversify their alliances. Saudi Arabia is forging economic ties with China, and the United Arab Emirates is acquiring weaponry from Russia. South Korea is developing its own nuclear capabilities, driven by uncertainty about America's commitment to their defense. Europe is discussing strategic autonomy, a clear signal that they no longer fully trust us to provide their security. The prestige that has deterred our adversaries for 80 years is beginning to falter. And once this prestige completely disintegrates, we will enter the fifth stage. Stage 5 is the inevitable collapse. When adversaries perceive American military strength as diminished, they will exploit vulnerabilities across multiple fronts simultaneously. China will likely move on Taiwan. Russia may escalate its actions in Ukraine or the Baltic states. Iran could disrupt the Strait of Hormuz, and North Korea might take aggressive action against South Korea. The United States will find itself incapable of responding to all these simultaneous threats. We lack sufficient naval vessels, aircraft, ground forces, and munitions to engage in conflicts across multiple theaters concurrently. Our war games consistently predict a loss against China in a conflict over Taiwan. We have run these simulations numerous times. The outcome is not due to China's superior military, but our inability to rapidly deploy adequate forces. The loss of even a single aircraft carrier, demonstrating China's capacity to sink American warships, would shatter the long-held perception of American naval invincibility. This pattern is unfolding in real time. We are currently in Stage 4. The withdrawal from Afghanistan served as our definitive Adrian Obel moment, the point at which the world witnessed that American military dominance was not as absolute as previously believed. Stage 5 is imminent. It will be characterized by numerous challenges across diverse operational theaters, allies distancing themselves from American security assurances, adversaries acting with impunity, and America discovering its inability to uphold all its global commitments. The historical timeline is instructive. Rome endured 32 years from the era of Hadrian to the sack of the city. The Soviet Union collapsed within 2 years of its intervention in Afghanistan. France capitulated in 6 weeks after invasion. This pattern accelerates with each iteration due to the increasing speed of global affairs. Information travels instantaneously, and adversaries can coordinate their actions on a global scale. How much time does America have? Perhaps 5 years, perhaps 10. But the trajectory is undeniable, and once Stage 5 commences, Stage 6 will follow swiftly. Because once the cascade begins, once allies hedge their bets and adversaries launch their attacks, an empire can no longer sustain its global standing. Military installations will be abandoned, commitments will be relinquished, the armed forces will retreat to homeland defense, and the era of American global supremacy will conclude. This outcome is not predetermined. However, averting it necessitates an unprecedented action for any declining military power, acknowledging the problem, accepting reality, and undertaking a fundamental restructuring before the collapse. Rome failed to do so. France failed to do so. The Soviet Union failed to do so. Each believed its reputation would sustain it. Each presumed it was an exception. Each ultimately discovered it was not. The pattern is indifferent to notions of exceptionalism. It is rooted in mathematical realities. One cannot maintain a global empire when its military is progressively weakening. Power projection across vast distances becomes impossible with a diminishing force. Sustaining operational readiness is unattainable when equipment is aging and recruitment is faltering. Relying on reputation becomes futile once that reputation is demonstrably disproven. This pattern has led to the downfall of military superpowers on 3 occasions: Rome, France, and the Soviet Union. Each believed its military might was permanent, ignored the warning signs, mistook prestige for actual capability, and ultimately collapsed when confronted with reality. The United States is currently mirroring this pattern. The same warning signs are present, the same denial is being exhibited, and the same trajectory is being followed. We are at stage 4 of a 6-stage process. The withdrawal from Afghanistan was our critical juncture. Stage 5 represents the cascade of setbacks. Stage 6 marks the cessation of American military dominance. The pertinent question is not whether this will occur. The historical pattern indicates it will. The real question is the speed at which it will unfold, and whether any entity is prepared to confront reality before it becomes irrevocably too late. If this analysis has offered a fresh perspective on the current standing of American power, please subscribe. Because when Stage 5 begins, when the cascade is unleashed, you will want to understand the causes and consequences. The pattern is etched in history, and history suggests that our current course leads to the inevitable.